There are 4 research programs within the Cooperative Research Centre for High Performance Soils. Today you're hearing about Program 1, which is investing in high performance soils, and there are other seminars covering the other 3 programs. Program 1 is the human stuff involved with soils. So the collaborators in Program 1 have expertise in economics, social sciences, extension practice, farming systems innovation, entrepreneurship, crucially farming, and also big data and programming. The big data programming people won't show up so much in today's presentation because they're coming in hopefully in future work, but that they're part of the team. Just briefly about me, the program lead. I have a background in agriculture and natural resource management, but these days I'm into social science. I'm an associate professor in environmental sociology. That picture there shows you what sociologists do. Everyone else does good stuff, and the social researchers watch them doing it and analyse it. My research field is adaptive management, participatory research, social learning, social ecological systems, and I'm based at Sturt University in Albury, New South Wales. Okay, what's it all about? We know that research and is about change. It's about helping people do things better, do things differently. And a fairly simple understanding of research and change is that there's research, in this case soil-related research, turns into information, turns into knowledge. Eventually that's learning. You make decisions about soils, you adopt, you change. I've put a little bit of an adaptive learning loop in there. After you've done something, you learn a bit about it. So that's a fairly simple understanding, and it sort of drives a lot of our research in Australia in agriculture. And programs 2, 3 and 4 in the Soil CRC are in that soils related research area. But we know that agriculture is a dynamic human activity, and it's undertaken in conditions of uncertainty and complexity. Just in relation to the soils research, there's a lot we don't know, there's a lot we don't understand about connections and actions within the biophysical part. But we also know that there's a lot of complexity and uncertainty in the human side of learning and deciding and changing. Now this is a little simplified diagram of the complexity that was developed as part of the scoping project for this soil CRC. This shouldn't surprise anyone. You should think, of course, it's going to be influenced by the life and land use objectives of managers. Of course, the social norms will come into it. The idea of soil as a public and private good is really important. Personal cognition, values, all these things influence how people take information, build knowledge, learn, make decisions. And that's what Program 1 is looking at. We have 4 output areas. One of those is around, particularly focused on the values, and particularly as expressed through economics, because that's the major way that we show how we value things. We have an area around, you know, the more social side of why people choose to do things, what their motivations are, how they come to a decision about things. That's an area around adoptability in output area 2. We have an output area around risk and thinking beyond the economic risk and into a variety of how people react, interact with risk in making decisions. And we also have an output area around how people develop new ways of doing things, how innovation is undertaken and how it can be enhanced, building the capacity for innovation. So our 4 output areas are summarised as economics, adoptability, risk and building capacity for innovation. And I'll talk briefly about each of those. In the economics output area, we currently, I'm only talking about really the current projects. We currently have 3 projects working in these areas. One of them is around activating consumer markets. Another is around activating the property markets, hedonics. And finally, the third area is around activating financial markets. So it's all about how can we better use the economic valuing to reflect rewards for good soil stewardship. The first project is led by Mark Morrison at Sturt University. They've had focus groups to assess consumer knowledge and demand for soil stewardship, interviews with value chain stakeholders, including farmer groups. That little thing means these are done, finished. And they're currently developing materials to test if a marketing campaign could influence the behaviour of people in the consumer value chain. So it's really looking at how would you build is it feasible to get consumers to put their money where their thoughts are and actually reward good soil stewardship. Similarly, another project led by Mark Morrison at Sturt University is around property pricing. An initial study has been completed. We've found that there are explanatory variables related to soil and soil management and motivations that haven't been included in past studies, and have worked toward how to do that in a potential future study. The third one is activating financial markets, and Nick will talk about that in just a minute. In the second output area, we have 2 major projects. One is understanding adoptability and techniques, led by Vaughan Higgins at the University of Tasmania, and the second is surveying farm practices. The project that Vaughan's leading has been holding participatory workshops with landholders from 7 grower group readings, the regions, the grower groups that are in our part of the project partners in the soil CRC, interviews with the advisors in each of the areas, and these are just finishing up now. Preliminary findings suggest that we should shift the focus from this idea of barriers to adoption to developing and supporting networks of knowledge networks and support networks. We've been working with the Riverine Plains, the Eyre Peninsula, I've forgotten what EPAF stands for, but they're on the Eyre Peninsula, the West Australian No-Till Farmers Association, McKillop Farm Management Group, Central West Farming Systems, NRM North, and Birchip Cropping Group. Again, I won't talk about the surveying on farm practices because Hanabeth is going to talk about that in a minute. Our third project area is thinking beyond return on investment in risk. And this is a project led by Carla Saravanamuthu at University of Newcastle. This has the premise that managing soil requires decisions about many factors, but risk associated with soil management decisions is usually focused on those short-term financials, on return on investment. Carla's approach is a risk platform that accounts for the uncertainty inherent in the complex interactions in agri-ecosystems. And the current project that she's working on is really a scoping project showing the potential of this to farming group partners through workshops. And that involvement has been so far with the Central West Farming Systems, Birchip Cropping Group, and the Wimmera Catchment Management Authority, developing up for a potential project in the future. The fourth and last output area is building capacity for innovation, led by David Falapau at Sturt University, based on the idea that the knowledge that innovation doesn't just happen. It requires systems and it requires activities and capacity building to enable that. The current project is doing just that. It's a program tailored for farmer groups. It works with farmer groups and helps develop activities and processes to enable innovation in the soil management space. The farmers as innovators, addressing, the farmers groups that we've been working with there, Birchip Cropping Group, Central West Farming Systems, Eyre Peninsula Agricultural Research Foundation, got it right there, and the Herbert Kane Productivity Services. Just quickly, I'll finish with, so what? Why are we doing all this? Why is the soil CRC talking about people? The aim is that there's new collaborations among scientists, advisors, growers that can be really effective into the future. Soils are also being introduced into new areas of activity, markets and banks, and more nuanced markets that can better reward soil stewardship are being explored. Extension people will be able to access new understandings of the growers and their industries and understand how people make decisions. And some farmer groups, the idea would be as many as possible, can be empowered to shape their future with better understanding of holistic innovation and risk in relation to their soils. If you want to connect with any of these projects, talk to me. I'm Catherine Allan. I'm quite easy to talk with, or connect with any of the project leaders. Go onto the Soil CRC website, talk with them directly. So that's how to contact us, and these details will be available after that. Sorry, what I should be doing is stopping the sharing. I can see that we have no questions at the moment. Remember, if you have any questions on this, pop them into the Q&A. Nick, would you like to start preparing for your presentation, please? So Nick is part of that output area 1, and I'll hand over to Nick now.
Thanks, Catherine. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Catherine introduced, the focus of my project is about activating financial markets to reward good soil stewardship, and we're adopting a collaborative approach to facilitate this process. The project team includes representatives from Charles Sturt University, Federation Uni, University of Southern Queensland, Murdoch and UTAS. And the project itself has followed up from an initial scoping study that was led by Mark Morrison, which identified financial markets as a key mechanism through which farmers might be rewarded for good soil stewardship. And this is a significant market. If we just look at the raw numbers, we're talking about more than 140,000 borrowers. We're talking about more than $70 billion in loans and leases, all being used to fund land acquisitions, machinery acquisitions, and also to cover operating costs. And we've been working to identify key leverage points that would activate financial markets to reward soil stewardship. So could, for instance, good soil stewardships be rewarded by their banks through a more attractive interest rate? Is there a possibility for new loan instruments to be created to fund investments in soil stewardship? So we recognise that if farmers are going to invest in soil stewardship, they need to have the finance to support it, with many of these activities involving significant capital outlays. And as part of our approach, we want to avoid a top-down approach, and we want to promote collaboration between researchers, farmers, and the financial industry. And we're exploring the use of a collaborative approach based on systemic co-inquiry, which is all about researching with people rather than on people, engaging stakeholders as co-researchers in the process. So if we look nationally and globally, we can see there's a lot of interest in this space, financial incentives for soil stewardship. So we see a lot of farmers are calling out for incentives. We've seen governments such as those in the UK looking at possible grants for investments in soil stewardship. Nationally, we've seen the launch of a pilot a scheme for payments for biodiversity investments. And we don't have to look too far for some positive examples of good soil stewardship being recognised in financial markets through different mechanisms, including through improved land valuations. The focus of our project was to demonstrate effective principles for collaboration to be used by other soil CRC projects who are looking to better understand the needs of farmers and other relevant stakeholders. And our focus, as I've noted, is specifically in regards to financial markets, and we're looking to strengthen existing networks and develop an agenda for ongoing studies concerning soil valuation and financial mechanisms to reward effective soil stewardship. The project itself involved 3 co-inquiry workshops, which we ran last year. Luckily, we didn't have the virus at the time. I'm not quite sure how we would have done it this year. We would have had to do it through Zoom, or at least try to, as we're doing now. So our first workshop was hosted by the NAB in Melbourne. Our second workshop was in Perth and was hosted by WANTFA. And we had a final workshop in Toowoomba that was hosted by USQ. So in the lead up to the workshops, we spent a number of months engaging with industry, identifying potential participants from the banking industry, from different grower groups, from different individual farmers and corporate farmers. We worked to engage with the valuation industry, soil science, different government departments and conservation groups. So through our initial contact with potential participants, we refined the scope of our project and got input into the design of our workshops. And throughout the 3 workshops, we were able to attract more than 50 participants across the 3 workshops. So based on feedback in the lead up to the workshops, we refined the scope of the workshop to focusing on identifying opportunities to reward soil stewardship through financial markets and provide an opportunity for the banks, grower groups, corporate advisors, other stakeholders to engage in this process, talk about the current system, identify leverage points and opportunities and pathways to activate these markets to reward soil stewardship through, for instance, farm risk and profitability assessment. So is there a possibility that good soil stewards might be rewarded through a better deal on their loan, given an understanding of the relationship between soil stewardship and risk? Is there a possibility that good soil stewards might be rewarded through improved land valuations? What would be required to facilitate that process? This is just to give you an idea of what a typical workshop looked like in following the co-inquiry principles. So throughout the workshop, we had a range of interactive activities designed to gauge different organisations and individuals' interest in soil stewardship, explore and understand the relationship between growers, the finance industry, corporate advisors, government departments and other stakeholders, with an understanding of that system, identify leverage points that would ultimately lead to the reward for good soil stewardship through financial markets, testing whether there's specific locations or farming systems that might be particularly ready to start to actually get involved in the creation of financial incentives for soil stewardship, identify possible ways and future steps to engage producers and the financial sector in the design and conduct of research, seek agreement on the priorities going forward, and also identify participants' commitments to support this process. So as part of the workshops, we use various different co-design activities, including rich pictures and systems maps, and other group activities that were designed to help us to understand and visualize the relationship between farming, finance, research, conservation, and government sectors, and seek agreement on the priorities and most viable leverage points, and begin to map out future research activities. From the discussion, we gained a deeper appreciation of just how sophisticated bank lending processes currently are, with these systems currently taking into account a broad range of factors when a loan application hits their desk, from productivity, cash flow forecasts, the farmer's capacity and experiences. Banks on the whole were relatively comfortable with these current practices, given relatively low levels of default compared to other sectors that they're lending to. Despite this though, overall, the banks, other financial market participants and growers generally accepted the importance of good soil stewardship and how it can deliver important productivity, profitability and legitimacy benefits. And in regards to the legitimacy side of things, banks recognise that it's in their interest to assure regulators and society that their role in the marketplace in lending is maintaining and building healthy soils, not degrading it. We often heard the comment that we accept that good soil stewards are profitable farmers. We accept that. Despite all this, however, there was a recognition of a need to further demonstrate this relationship between soil stewardship and profitability, and improve the connection specifically between bankers and researchers and growers, and better translate the soil science into information that is understandable to the finance industry. So there was a belief amongst a number in the finance industry that soil science is overly focused on productivity. What they're interested in cash flows and ROI data, and they want to have access to this data. So there's often this comment from the finance industry, well, if soil stewardship leads to productivity and profitability and cash flows, where is the data? So this overall uncertainty over there was compounded by the recognised inherent complexity of soil systems, practices and outcomes, and the diverse nature of soil stewardship rewards, whether that be through improved productivity, whether it be through lower input costs, whether it be through land valuations, whether it be through possible price premiums through consumer markets. There's lots of different sources of potential soil stewardship returns, and there was a perception that there's a lack of research that links soil stewardship into financial metrics such as profit and cash flows that are utilised by the finance industry, has sufficient spatial and time horizons that the finance industry recognises as a reliable set of data, and is communicated in a way that is understandable to the finance industry. Concerning land valuations, a number of farmers, particularly in the corporate farming space, perceive that all of their investments in soil stewardship are not being recognised in land valuation practices. So as some people commented, these investments are often written off as an expense, and they're otherwise invisible on the balance sheet. When we talk to the valuers about this, however, they recognise, well, there's limited data availability that demonstrates the relationship between soil stewardship and land valuations. There's issues with soil management and other soil health data not being available to valuers and prospective buyers. And there is a tendency for good soil good soil stewards to hold on to their properties in the long term, again, limiting the amount of data that's available that links soil stewardship to land valuation. There was some discussion about the possibility of multi-peril crop insurance, with particularly with the possibility of good soil stewards, given the de-risking properties of soil stewardship, whether there was a possibility that good soil stewards could be rewarded through these types of insurance products. So there was a general belief that unless the government gets involved in this process, in the short term at least, this option requires further development. So based on an understanding of the system, a consideration of various different pathways, we identified a range of potential research priorities. At the end of each workshop, participants identified their commitments to support these future activities, from the provision of relevant data through the facilitation of access to farmers and other relevant stakeholders throughout their networks. And based on the outcomes of this project, we've worked to develop a proposal for the next soil CRC investment round, which is focused on organising all of the evidence and data that we have available on soil stewardship best management practices and the costs and benefits related to these practices. We're working to identify relevant and understandable soil performance indicators that are usable and understandable to the finance industry. We're going to work to continue to connect up the finance and the farming industry, lock down a pilot or pilot activities that will activate financial markets to reward good soil stewardship. And all of this is in conjunction with three grower groups in Sturt Cropping Group, WANTFA and Riverine Plains, in conjunction with our commercial partners, NAB and Deloitte. Thanks for your time, and I'll hand back to Catherine. I'll look forward to responding to the questions at the end of Hanabeth's presentation.
Thanks very much, Nick. There have been a few questions. They're appearing in chat. I think it's quite valuable if we can put the questions also into by preference, into the question and answer. But there are some in chat, and we will come back to them after Hanabeth's presentation. I just also wanted to say we're highlighting two projects, but all of the projects would have been really fascinating. We just don't have the time in the seminar today. These are just a sample of the types of the range of work which is happening across Program 1. I'll hand over to Hanabeth Luke, who is will explain her different but equally fascinating project. Hanabeth, I'll pop up on the screen when 15 minutes is up.
Thank you, Catherine. So I'm just going to be talking today about our project surveying on-farm practices. My name's Hanabeth Luke from Southern Cross University. I'm a lecturer there, and my background is in environmental science, but my postgraduate training has been in social dimensions of land use, change and management. So I'm just going to be, okay, so this is our wonderful project team. And so we're in partnership with a whole range of groups, including Southern Cross University, Charles Sturt, but also local farmer groups across regions and also government organisations. In South Australia, we have, in Victoria, we have the North Central CMA group. In South Australia, we have EPAF and LEADER, who are presently joining to form AIR EP. We've got PRAC on board in Western and Eyre Peninsula NRM in Western Australia, Wheatbelt NRM, Western Australia, WANTFA, West Midlands Group, and in New South Wales we've got the DPI and Central West Farming Systems who are all participating in our project, and I'll explain their roles as we move on. So the key reasons behind our survey project are based on this idea. We know well that the on-farm strategies that farmers will adopt are critical to soil health and productivity, but we need to better understand why some farmers more easily engage, adapt and adopt while others do not. So this project is around focusing on a whole range of social factors which influence the acceptabilities of initiatives and technologies which relate to specifically soil health, but also the bigger picture of how farms are managed and how they interact. So having a really good understanding of these on-farm practices and the farmer priorities and the beliefs and the values that underpin those practices can help local organisations and the Soil CRC and our other partner organisations to inform the ongoing priorities and strategic direction. So this also can help them with innovation, capacity building and better informed scientists of the Soil CRC as well. So our project strategy is to survey 6 farming regions across Australia, and that's 1 in each state. And it's using a well-established survey methodology, which is a mail-out survey approach, which we usually will get between 40 and 60% returns on this methodology. The regions are identified based on a whole range of factors relating to other Soil CRC projects, but most importantly, it's about finding partners in those regions who can really see the benefit of our work and want to work with us to co-design the survey so they can be of best relevance to those groups in that region. And there is also a Soil CRC milestone to have follow-up surveys in the future, which means that we could utilise this opportunity to examine the trends occurring over time. This does result in a whole range of data that can lead to high quality, that is a part of high quality sociology research. And the data itself is spatially referenced, which means that, as you can see from this diagram here, from just a quick, this is a little image from our recent report, and it shows that if you look at the full-time, the farmers are divided into 4 rough groups. If you look at full-time farmers being lime green, you can see very quickly that the further you go from Melbourne, the more full-time farmers broadly you have in those different regions. So there's for a whole range of reasons, spatially referenced data is extremely helpful, and it can also be used in cross-reference with all sorts of soil and weather and other spatial data that is available. So we are, as I mentioned, we're looking at running surveys in all 6 states. We have already conducted our first survey in Victoria, and this is a part of the broader Soil CRC milestone. We're presently funded to run surveys in Victoria, South Australia, Western Australia, and in New South Wales. And so we're, and in Victoria, the surveys are done. We have written up reports. In South Australia, a survey is out at the moment with 2,000 farmers. In Western Australia, we have an advanced survey draft, and we'll be next working with, hopefully with Central West Farming Systems in New South Wales. And the work is, I won't go into too much detail of in terms of the sociology, but it's based on some broad sociological principles that behaviours and practices are based on a whole range of things, including values, beliefs and norms. But we also bring other factors into this, but including economics and physical factors that they report. But broadly, this survey is around, and this whole project is around better understanding people and what motivates them, but it's also recognizing that there are some things that we're going to be able to change, and such as knowledge, understanding, and the way that we do things and engage people. And this can in turn inform better strategic planning. So as I mentioned, there are some things that are going to be more difficult to change, such as demographics and values. There are other things we can change, but by bringing better understanding both, we can know what to focus on for targeted engagement and improve management practices. So we don't need to go into too much detail here, but there are 14 main survey sections, and they relate to these key factors. And what will be in each of those sections is defined by the farmer priorities that are developed through workshop process in each region through this co-design process. So a little bit about the co-design process. So we work with the local and the partner groups to identify the key areas that would be best to survey and how big those regions should be. And they usually relate to those local partner groups. So as I mentioned, in South Australia, we've been looking at the Eyre Peninsula and particularly working with EPAF, LEADER and PERSA, and also the EP-NRM group, and that's them sitting at the table there on the top right. We also work, and we've designed the survey there, and it's now, as I said, sitting in mailboxes across the Eyre Peninsula. And designing that survey there's a lot of back and forth. We develop the survey. Everyone that helps to develop it gets the chance to give feedback on that, and then we also ask farmers to come together to fill in a pre-test survey, and then we get more feedback. So we really have a lot of faith in that final tool as it goes out and hits people's letterboxes. We also have to access property information, so we can send it out to people outside of just those groups, so we can get an understanding of why people engage with those groups and perhaps why they don't. And that can be particularly useful for those groups to help better engage non-members. So it's a mail-out survey, but we also have a hybrid survey under trial in South Australia at the moment. So this involves an advance notice where people can opt out, and also an online survey, which is receiving some positive response, so that's good. And of course, when we send out these surveys, an engagement or media campaign is really critical. So that's a really important part of what we're doing, and we've got press releases presently going out across the Eyre Peninsula to encourage farmers to fill it in. But as the pictures down the bottom there, that's actually the West Midlands group in Western Australia, just asking them how important a particular topic is that they want to focus on, trying to get a bit of a gauge there. And that's myself and David Minke on the left there. This is during one of my last trips to Western Australia. And during that design process, it's around saying, okay, what are the most important things that you as a group want to understand about your farmers? And that's different in every region. For example, in South Australia, there was a big focus on, well, we really want to understand our emerging leaders. And while that's still important in Western Australia, there's a really big focus on better understanding how farmers use and manage data. So those focuses obviously have really important relevance to the Soil CRC as well. And just to give you a bit of a taste of some preliminary results that have come from our North Central CMA survey in Victoria. So there are obviously some key objectives that will emerge from those processes of co-development with the groups. And this is some of the key things that the North Central CMA wanted to see out of the survey. So to understand farming structures and social factors, and also to assess the effectiveness of some programs, and what are the key things that are influencing landholder adoption of best practice soil and NRM, soil management and NRM. And this can really also inform their engagement with rural property owners. So I'll just give you some basic numbers there. You can have a read through to those. So there also was a survey that took place in 2014, which we took advantage of and repeated some of the questions, so we could test that longitudinal or over time survey method. And we found there was 22% females, and that the most filling it in, and that the most important attached value was the ability to pass on a healthier environment for future generations. We also asked farmers or landholders to identify themselves by occupational identity, which is whether they were full-time or part-time farmers or hobby farmers or non-farmers, which is going to have varying levels of importance in different areas. For example, I think we'll have much less non-farmers on the Eyre Peninsula, But if you can see just a little bit more zooming in on that, when we looked between those groups in the North Central CMA, when we divided it up by full-time, part-time, hobby and non-farmers, you can see that there was a really big difference in the gender of respondents and between those different groups. For example, between full-time farmers and non-farmers, there were much bigger property areas, and we only sent the survey out to people with properties over 10 hectares, but we found the full-time farmers generally had much bigger properties. Makes sense. Also, far more of them had family members working on the property and had much higher level of their proportion of their income coming from agriculture in that region. And also importantly, we did find that farmers were engaged in a lot, far more in things like soil management workshops and training, and had more advanced property plans and management plans. Also from this survey, we could find that there are 3 key information sources were the BOM, newspapers, and also friends, neighbours and relatives. So you can never underestimate the power of the chat across the fence. The 3 farm scale issues was soil erosion, followed by nutrient status, and also low biological activity in soils, which was the second most important for the full-time farmer groups. And in terms of the regional scale issue, we had some really interesting results there. We found that while changes in weather patterns was the most important regional issue by all participants, there was still only 48% of full-time farmers who believe that it was down to human activities, and some quite inverse relationships between their pessimism and about how we can address that, as you can see. So farmers believe that in terms of the bottom one, if we do nothing, there will be dire consequences. More farmers said, no, we'll actually be all right. So we can also, from this, we can model best practice. And from that, we can find, by looking at the various results and putting the likely relationships together and testing their significance of the strength of their relationships, we can find that farmers are more likely to conduct a best practice like apply soil ameliorants other than fertilizer and lime if they are full-time farmers, if their values are very strong in terms of that accomplishment from producing food and fiber, if they have good knowledge of the production benefits of this, and if they have confidence in best practice. But also we found that a predisposition to accept risk was very important as well in terms of adopting many best practices. So I won't go into too much detail about this, but from this we can find out that the particular values, beliefs and norms, which is the personal relationships, normal behaviours that they consider to be really important in how they manage their property and how they influenced how they manage their property. So the ability to pass on a healthier environment, their beliefs in private property rights, the importance of them to maintain their soil's productive capacity, combined with their predisposition to accept risk or not, but also related very importantly to their predisposition to trust in the local groups, which is well supported in the literature, but trust was very, very important here in terms of best practice as well. So this will relate and combine with the issues of concern, and will eventually relate to the engagement processes and the best practice implementation. We have 2 PhD students involved in the project. At the moment, we've got Louise Hunt, who's looking at complexities of farming in the 21st century. So she's bringing together a whole range of these issues and factors to try and understand what is driving farmer decision making. And she's drawing on these data sets from 6 regions. It's mostly quantitative, but there's also a lot of qualitative questions that have been included on demand from our partners as well. And Matt Alexanderson is also working with us and is looking at changes in farm management styles with a focus on alternative farming approaches using a triple bottom line analysis. And we have another SOCIOLOGICAL funded project which is beyond adoption, and it's around finding more appropriate ways to evaluate the success of soil outreach. So that's really coming to the end of it now. Thank you all for listening. Tried to give you a bit of a snapshot of the whole project and where we're up to at the moment. And I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thanks very much, Hanabeth, and to Nick before that. We are running well on time. We have 10 minutes for questions, and there are some questions in the Q&A at the moment. I think it's best if we take them one by one. The first couple are for Nick. So I think if everyone opens up the Q&A, you'll see them there. The anonymous attendee, first of all, wants to know how the bank will know what my soil is like if they don't measure it. So Nick, could you respond to that one, please?
Thanks, Catherine, and good question. So certainly through our contact with the banks, we identified a diversity between different institutions and between different individual bankers in terms of how engaged they are with soil information. A lot of the industry was comfortable that we kind of feel that we're able to pick the good farmers from the poor farmers based on our current systems, and that good soil stewardship already reflects up in our productivity and our profit and the profitability of farmers. There was an interest in being better connected up with soil information, but they wanted the relationship between soil stewardship and profitability to be assured to them, and they're wanting further work to identify understandable, accessible, comparable soil KPIs. So at the moment, yes, certainly there's a gap in terms of the amount of soil information that's used by banks. They're interested, but they want the assurance that it can actually help them to predict risk.
Thanks, Nick. I think it's probably fair to say that you really are breaking some new ground with this project. So a lot of these questions are really pertinent, and that's partly what you're working on at the moment. I think that's fair to say that. Gabrielle had a question too, Gabrielle Chan, about financial rewards. Are you talking about in the project private markets or government funding?
Yeah, so initially, and we have been focused on private markets through banks, but the further we explore the options, the importance of government backing to underwrite or subsidise any potential new instruments is recognised as important. So yeah, we're interested in engaging with government, different government departments as well, and how they can work in conjunction with the finance industry, as other similar schemes have unfolded internationally and domestically.
So over to Hanabeth for a few questions now. Balaji has asked a question: how do you manage getting responses to mail out surveys? It's a really pertinent question for anyone who does this work. So Hanabeth.
Thanks, Catherine. So we send lots of reminders. We've also, in terms of the South Australian survey, sent the advance notice, as I mentioned. So that goes out 3 weeks before the survey, so people know it's coming. And we send them quite a lot of reminders and a second survey. So they really do have lots of opportunity to fill it in and generally the response rate has been very strong in this methodology. We got under just under 40% in the North Central CMA. So people do fill it in and it does work. And yeah.
Yeah, and so the way back in the design of this is the Dillman method, which was, and as Hanabeth said in her presentation, it's something which has been used over and over again, refined, worked out for individuals. Part of that amazing amount of energy that Hanabeth has put into working with the groups, making sure that it is actually applicable to them, that it's not just a survey coming out of the blue, that they understand where it's coming from, what it's about. All of this helps the response rate and makes it an involved, expensive process. So a short answer is there are methods, but you can't cut corners and you have to pay for it. Yeah. and Hanabeth's a star at this.
Thanks, Catherine. No, I think there's a lot of relationship building is really important, and working with those trusted local groups. As Nick mentioned in his project as well, it's sort of that relationship building and the networking is very important. I think that's coming, out of Vaughan's project. Yeah, but the utilizing those networks to gain some awareness of it, and that it's going to be of use. But also it's always so important to make sure that people get feedback, and that once they've filled it in, they have the opportunity to read the results and understand what they've contributed towards. So if you do that, the next time you try and do it, you're going to have a much better response than if you go out and get information from people and they never hear from you again.
Okay, so Hanabeth, a question from Roger Swift. How do you differentiate the way you handle factual responses versus opinion, belief, including exaggeration, up and down, and untruths?
Very good question, Roger. And I think it's a perennial question in any social research. But I guess it's just around how we can never truly know. We're asking people their opinion about how their farm works. And the best we can do is set up a really good tool. So it's around questions, what do they believe their knowledge levels to be? We're not saying this is their knowledge level. We can't do it, not giving them an exam on their knowledge on particular soil management practice. Although some people have tried to do that in the past, but generally we just have to work on that premise that we are working on people's perceptions of their knowledge.
Yep, and I think, Roger, it's carefully designed because people do make decisions on their opinions, and so it's around what is influencing how people are making decisions, and it's understanding what those opinions are is as important as some of the factual information, I guess. We'll keep moving. The questions are coming through. If you feel we haven't answered these fully, keep typing in there. Nancy Boland has a question for Hanabeth. Yep. Farmers are worried about low biological activity in their soils. How do they monitor it?
Yep, good question, Nathy, thank you. So we've got some preliminary results back from the South Australian survey, really some very preliminary ones just from the online one, and that's something that has come up in terms of, and combined with the Victorian. So we're finding that people do actually have quite low knowledge about how to do that. So there's a real opportunity there to improve knowledge about how they can monitor their biological activity. There's a range of factors, but it's one of the lower knowledge items that we've had.
A question from Cal about, I think it is for Hanabeth, but I think Nick, you might also have a comment on this, based on enterprise and land use for each of the farming regions, cropping versus grazing. So Hanabeth first, but also Nick, you know, how broad is what you're working on in your project? Hanabeth first.
Yeah, absolutely. We ask questions on their particular land use and cropping type. So we can divide up the survey by cropping region broadly as well, or the survey responses. So particular to a specific cropping or production system.
Nick?
Yeah, so for our proposed project, our focus in terms of farming system type or soil constraint issue will be informed by our grower group partners and the feedback we get from industry about what is the most viable space to be focusing on initially.
Yep. We'll run through these. We've only got 2 minutes left, but we'll keep answering questions till the end of the seminar. One for Hanabeth from Matt. I think you can read that there, Hanabeth. It's about pulling the lime out of the soil ameliorants.
Yes.
Given that Victoria's acid, what's your response?
That was just because we wanted to find out about other things. We have a different item on lime specifically, but we wanted to look at other things because lime is indeed, as you point out, such a big issue. Yep.
So it is in there, you're covering it. It's just the way you design it, you can find out about other things so that lime doesn't swamp everything.
Exactly.
Yep. Roger asked me about barriers to innovation objective was being modified on the basis of the responses. I think it was actually barriers to adoption I was talking about there, Roger, and this is preliminary findings that are coming out of the project being led by Vaughan Higgins that really probably focusing on barriers to adoption is less, will have less impact than focusing on ways to encourage learning and uptake. There's more that will be coming out of that project, but that was really that very quick throwaway line. There are a couple of questions which I think we'll have to answer via email. Thank you very much to everyone who's asked questions. Thank you very much for coming. We've had over 50 participants today. That's been fantastic. Thank you for coming, and if I finish now, I'll finish right on 1 o'clock, which is good. Thanks very much. Bye-bye. And Catherine, you might have to